Hello and welcome to another episode of Sexual Confidence on Tap with Shannon, Ethridge, and friends. And today you get to meet a very old friend. Not that he is old, but we were just talking about how long we've known each other. And we met in 2001 in the deep piney woods of East Texas, where you still are, right, Chris?
I still am. Yes, I'm still here.
Pastor Chris Legg, by the way.
Yep.
Chris, tell us what you do in Tyler, Texas.
Well, in addition to being the lead pastor at South Spring here, I'm also, what I did long before that was I'm a licensed counselor and have a counseling center here called Aletheia Family Counseling Center. And so I do, we now have, I don't know, you probably don't know, but we now have branches in Nacogdoches, in Dallas, in Austin, College Station. So yeah,
awesome.
AletheaCounseling.com has all those details and all our resources and everything. So it's pretty fun. And then I've been married 30 years, got 5 kids, and those keep me very busy.
And do I recall correctly, Ginger is also a redhead?
No, Ginger's not. She's not a redhead. Ellie is. My daughter Ellie is. Ginger, my wife Ginger is not a ginger. I'm the only ginger that in the marriage. And then, but I have a daughter who's a redhead, and in fact, you'll appreciate my eldest son, Mark, who wrote the book with me. He's actually in Scotland right now, finishing up his master's in philosophy, of all things. So he's been there and will be there for another year, just hanging out,
Edinburgh, right?
In Edinburgh. Yep.
There you go. So you mentioned the book. That was spoiler alert. Chris has written a book.
Exactly.
Which I've been waiting for the day that would happen, because all your years of being a counselor, how many years have you been a counselor now?
25 plus years. Yeah. 25-ish years.
And then how many years as a pastor?
10, 11, 12, maybe 13.
Okay.
Something like that.
So I love the fact that you have combined your love and knowledge and passion of scripture and therapy into a book called Sex and Marriage: Unlocking and Restoring the Power of Sex Through Biblical and Psychological Insight.
There you go.
So, first of all, where can they find the book if this is an intriguing conversation to them?
Yep. Well, the easiest one is Amazon. You can find, if you type in Sex and Marriage or my name, Chris Legg, Legg, you can find it that way pretty easily.
Okay.
And that's the easiest way. And also, I mean, I'm easy to find online. If somebody wants to reach directly out to me, I can get them a copy one way or another for sure. But that's the easiest, is via Amazon. And I know you've written some books too, and I mean, way before I did. In fact, you helped talk me into doing it years ago about how important it was going to be for me to do it. And you did all that training stuff, and which I stole whatever I could get from you. And then but you can imagine the debate over that subtitle. I don't know if you have those same things, but the discussion over it, because it's unlocking. If you've not messed this up yet, you're unlocking something. If you have messed this up, it's restoring it. And so, like, do we do unlock or restore or both, or you end up doing both? And so anyway, I know you have probably had many of those conversations.
The subtitle, in my opinion, is the hardest thing to craft, because it has to convey so much in so little.
Yes.
And writing tight is a big challenge. So I'm going to start out with a curveball question, because I feel like this is foundational to any conversation that involves both theology and philosophy or counseling.
Yep.
There seems to be a juxtaposition in some people's minds that counseling and sex, especially, that's like an oxymoron to include that in the same sentence with scripture or Christianity or faith.
Right. Yeah.
For many years, it seems as if someone was in a therapy camp, was trained as a counselor, that they were automatically assumed to be countercultural to the Bible.
Right.
And you and I both know that this isn't true, but what do you say to the person who's had this understanding that counselors can't be trusted if you're a Christian? If you're a Christian, you just need to go to your pastor, who may have no training whatsoever in counseling or sexuality. Yes. He can't help you exegete this problem.
Yes. One of the issues we talk about, actually, one of the main reasons I ended up writing the book was because so much has been published in the name of sexuality in Christian publishing that's so bad, that does more damage than it does then it helps. It creates this, we'll talk more about this later in a minute, but the transactional understanding of sex versus an intimacy understanding of sex. And so,
Ooh.
and we've got to, that was taught by pastors and leaders and biblical alleged people who knew what they were talking about with, in the counseling world. Anyway, but one of the things my feedback is always, what is this uncomfortable? Obviously, except for, present company excluded, you and I, there's not many people who feel comfortable talking about sex. It is a conversation that's uncomfortable. But one of the places where sex is talked about a lot is Scripture, is Holy Scripture. I mean, the New and Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures and the Christian Scriptures are filled with conversations about sex and sexuality. And when I think really people think we invented sexuality like in the 1960s. Certainly anything other than missionary position was invented in the 1960s.
Yeah.
And when you're
Yeah, it's
like,
like God created the elbows and the ears and the belly button, but the genitals were slapped on by the devil at the last
yeah,
minute.
exactly. And so people think they treat the Bible as though it's a squeamish book, like the Bible. I can't.
Oh,
You remember that great rewriting someone did of some of the old Jesus movies that they went in and redubbed them? And there's a great scene where Jesus is walking around telling each of the disciples the sin they most recently committed. If you've never seen this, you got to look it up. I'll show it. I'll send you a link later.
yeah.
But one of them, Jesus goes to one of them, goes, and Philip, I saw what you were doing the other day, but I can't say it out loud because I'm Jesus. And it's like, it has that set, like the Bible is like that. Like the Bible is, oh, we can't. And I told them, you understand the Bible specifically references bestiality. If you
Well, and oral
reference bestiality,
sex and various
yes,
positions. I delight to
every,
sit in my lover's shade. His fruit is
yes,
sweet to my taste. Yeah, that's pretty
right.
oral.
Or don't, yeah, make sure to the wisdom author saying, drink from only from your own wife's cistern. Like that's again, if he's not creating a euphemism there, he's doing a bad job of not creating a euphemism. Like it's pretty clear what's being referenced, but people think the Bible's squeamish. Anything that references bestiality is not squeamish. If the Bible wanted to forbid something, it's
Right.
not going to go like, no, we're not going to talk about that because we can't, because we're the Bible. No, it specifically references sex acts that are specific and way outside of what
Right.
we would say
It,
we would normally feel comfortable talking about.
it mentions incest. It mentions
Absolutely. Yep.
prostitution.
Yep.
Yeah, the whole gamut.
That's right.
Um, so I'm kind of jealous of the people who attend your church, because to have a pastor who is in charge of what's happening in that group spiritually and is a trained counselor
Yeah.
and believes in counseling so much that you created an entire network of counseling
Right.
clinics, which I personally have used in the past when I lived in Tyler, Texas. So I can give a shout out to Alethea. Wonderful people, wonderful counselors.
Yeah.
I'm just really jealous of the people who have a pastor with the understanding and insight of how important counseling and these psychological principles are. So how
Right.
did you come up with the idea to combine these principles together in one book?
Well, it's just because that's me now. I mean, I exist in that space. It's you'll appreciate like a lot of the private schools here in Tyler. If someone dies, the tragedy happens if a kid commits suicide or dies in a car accident, and a lot of times they'll have me come in and be the next chapel speaker to kind of talk about death. The other thing they have me come in and speak about is sex. And so I have this weird like role that the kids know when I show up to speak, the kids know it's going to be uncomfortable. They just don't know if it's going to be like I'm the angel of death and sex when it comes to the
Somebody
school
died,
system.
or we're getting another sex talk.
Exactly. And so I think it is an interesting, I just get to live there where I can openly talk about the psychological aspects, because I do believe that all truth is God's truth.
Yes.
And if someone finds out something or discovers something or recognizes something that is true, who they are can't make it not true. And so I disagree with about 95% of Sigmund Freud's conclusions. But the 5% that I think he's right about don't become not right because he's Sigmund Freud.
Right.
And so the truth is the truth regardless. And I think all good science and all good theology are all trying to understand the truth. And psyche means soul. It's the Greek word for soul. And so what we're trying to study is that non-physical aspect of who we are when we dive into psychology. And so if the biblical insights and the psychological insights overlap, then that's probably could be an indicator that's the truth.
Yeah.
And
But it
so,
reminds me of the expression from Richard Rohr that everything is sacred, whether we're talking about the roses on the
right,
bushes or the shit in the sewer. It's
right.
all sacred. God created everything, created all of it. So, this idea that once we start talking about sex, now we're in unchristian territory,
Yeah,
it
that's so
grieves
dangerous.
me. It grieves
It
me
does. Yeah,
deeply.
yeah.
Do you think that that's what holds parents back from talking openly with their children? Is that they feel as if, do you think that it's a faith taboo, or do you think they just don't have the courage, or
Um, Probably, I mean, I think it'd be cool if people could claim that it's a faith issue. I think most of the time it's just they're uncomfortable talking about sexuality even within their own sexual partnership, much less
Mm,
outside of that. And
right?
so I think that's a problem.
They
But
don't have the vocabulary.
yeah, that's right. Or the vocabulary they have, they're not willing to use. But yeah, it's a huge need. We actually you'll appreciate so the church produces a podcast called the Reconstructed Faith Podcast because during the deconstruction kind of fad that was happening pre-COVID,
Mhm.
the response very often among Christians was people deconstructing are bad, bad, bad. And
Right.
our attitude was, wait a minute, if you're deconstructing, that doesn't mean you're wrong. You just need to keep going. You don't
Right.
stop deconstruction. Well, we've had several episodes that were with, and two of them were interviews with young women in particular. One of them who deconstructed their faith because of the purity movement of the 80s and 90s, and even into the 2000s. That we talked about. It seemed to start really well with some of the true love waits principles.
Right.
Were pretty sound,
Well-intentioned youth pastors
but
and Southern
but
Baptists.
exactly. But then it turned into this. There's only one measure of Christianity, and it's what you've not done with your boyfriend recently, and it was so damaging, and people literally walking away from the faith because we weren't having sophisticated conversations about sexuality, and the ones we're having in marriage were bad, much less outside of
Right.
the con.
I'm glad to know that that message has trickled down south,
Oh yeah,
because when I first started speaking out about that, people were looking at me like I had lost my marbles,
yeah,
as if I don't think that purity is important anymore. And it's like,
right,
guys,
right,
I'm not being prescriptive. I'm being descriptive of what has been happening the past 30 years. So
right.
let's start there. I mean, since so much of that teaching was, supposedly biblical teaching, but yet it's done so much damage and created a
Mm,
lot of rifts between husbands and wives, and I think rifts even in people's own souls. I think that
right,
it has put them at odds within themselves about their own sexual desires.
absolutely.
Let's start there. How do you begin to heal that rift in understanding biblical principles and the psychological impact of that 30-year movement? Because this has been a topic that we've talked about many times on this podcast, and I'd love to hear people's perspectives.
So other than obviously getting a copy of the book and reading it, which is obviously that's the first step, right? Always that's what an author's
Every
supposed to say.
author's instructions.
Exactly. So what I would say is, one, we have to recognize the messages that we got and begin to dispute them, or at least evaluate them. Should they be safe, or are they right? Are they true? Are they not true? I don't remember if I referenced this in the book, but there's early on, like what I remember from youth camp was a speaker saying, girls watch out for the guys because they play at love, which they don't understand, in order to get sex, which is what they really want. And girls, you play at sex, which you don't understand, in order to get love, which is what you really want. That message communicating, I mean, imagine that rift now, decades later, even still in marriage, that girls have this interpretation tool, and so do guys, that guys don't really care about love. What they want is sex.
Mm.
And some of the
You only want
principles,
me for my body. You don't care
right?
about my heart and soul. Mhm.
That's right. And
Mhm.
in the book, one of the things I'm trying to interpret from all these different authors, yourself included, is this like, what is that rift that's there, and trying to understand. And it seemed to me like one thing that explained a lot of the research was that my experience with clients is that a lot of times women seem to, and this is probably cultural, but divide out their identity from their sexuality. And so they have this like, is this about me or is this about sex?
Right?
And so when the husband or whoever pursues his wife, she's actually still asking that questions 10, 20, 30 years later, because she has that interpretation tool from the very beginning. Is this about me or is this about sex?
That's the lens that she looks through.
Right.
The
Whereas
distorted
men,
lens.
most men don't even have that lens. Like we wouldn't know how to divide that out if we wanted to. So if I pursue my wife sexually, I don't divide that. I don't go, is this about sex or is this about her? It's that, no, those things are all mashed together for me.
Right.
And so I don't, I don't think in terms of, well, wait a minute, is this, what am I pursuing here? It's like, I'm pursuing my wife. And of course, one of my favorite ways to have my wife is this way. It's not, and that's what the good research showed, was that it's not about, men don't want sex, men want what sex means.
I love that. Say that again.
Okay, so it's not that men don't just want sex. We don't want, we want what sex means. So you would appreciate when I teach on this, I will often ask men. I do this whole scenario, and it is in the book about a young wife seducing her husband. And then I ask the men in the room, what does that feel like? And all of a sudden, all these men who can't talk, they have 9 emotional words in their entire vocabulary. All of a sudden, they all turn into William Shakespeare's. They're describing, it's like, I feel like I'm the king of the world. I feel like everything is right in my life. I feel like, and they describe this crazy
Euphoria.
level, which I intuit. I get all that.
Mhm.
And so, and like, right, everything, I'm the king of the world. I am finally home. Home is a common word that's used in that moment. I'm finally home. And then I'll describe later in the talk, I'll describe a time when the wife she's in her flannels and she just turns over and goes to sleep when he gets home, gives him a kiss. I'm so glad you're home, and goes to sleep. And then I say, what does that feel like? And the men describe this opposite extreme emotional, like I'm rejected. It's not that he wanted sex. He wanted to feel like the king of the world again. It's not the
Ah,
sex that he could have gotten the sex anywhere. It's that he wants this woman to choose him. And then here's what, so it took me a while to ever think to ask this question. And one day in the talk, I said, wait a minute, ladies, which of those 2 times, the time with rose petals and lingerie, or when you just gave him a kiss and went to sleep at night in your flannels, either time when he came home, which one were you more happy he was home?
mm,
And the women are all like, that's the same. Like, okay, from an emotional perspective, understand you just had a very similar experience. You're home with your husband and you're warm and you're safe.
it's
And and he had these 2 emotional experiences. He had
wow.
the
That's
king of the world,
powerful.
and then and so something is if they don't know that just happened, they're in trouble.
Yeah. See,
And
now
nothing.
I remember why I was pushing you to write a book. Like you're just full of just really great insights. And in my head, I'm like connecting other dots that I've never connected before, even after 30 years of doing this. Do you think that just this whole teaching of, yeah, men want sex and women want love, do you think that men have internalized that message as women don't want sex?
Oh, absolutely. 100% that has become, which of course, as your research shows, is absolutely not correct, right? It is not that women don't want sex. Now, I do think when we talk about emotional energy or psychological energy, I think very often women have to spend some psychological energy that men don't have to spend to engage sexually. It's like it's the arousal lock model that typically women have more locks on their arousal door than men do. And so you have to get those unlocked. And sometimes a wife has to spend more energy unlocking the door.
Mhm.
But here's the example I give people and all the time is I will say, imagine if I said, I've got $40,000 in cash up here in a bag. If you'll bring me $20,000 in cash in a bag, I will give you the 40, right? That's funny. I must have done a thumbs up symbol.
It's like
Um,
somebody's liking what you're saying.
I must be me liking what I just said. But I'll give you 40,000. Who will do it? Well, of course, everyone in the room raised their hand, and I say, really? You have $20,000 in cash? And they're like, well, no, I don't. Like, right. And what typically happens in marriages is the husband then goes, or a marriage book, a vast majority of them. Now the husband goes, okay, but you don't understand how important this is to me. It's worth 50,000 to me. It's worth 100,000 to me. It's worth 1,000,000 to me. And the wife is going, I still don't have 20. You're not solving the right problem.
Right.
I don't have the 20 to invest in engaging sexually with you. I have children hanging on me. I've got business. I've got job. I've got mother-in-law.
I've got weight issues. I don't feel good about my body.
All of
Yeah.
it. Anxiety, depression, pick any of it, right?
Right.
And so she's sitting on zero, Now, what he is confused about is because sexuality is so integrated into his identity, for men, not universally by any means, but typically men pay 0 in order to get 40. So if I go, I'll give you 40 for 0. Now, that doesn't mean women don't like sex. They do. It just costs a little bit of energy to initiate. It costs a little bit of energy to engage very often psychologically. That maybe for the average man, it doesn't cost us hardly anything because it's so integrated. But over and over, and I know you've heard this your whole career, is women who say that if you go, hey, you know what, your homework assignment is seduce your husband tonight, that her first response might be like, right, not because she doesn't like her husband or won't having sex with him, she's just trying to figure out what she's going to do with the kids or where she's going to get the energy to do it.
Exactly.
Right.
How we're going to squeeze that in between homework and bath time and dinner and dishes and
exactly.
Yeah.
But she loves it. And she will say, so you're like, oh, wow, you really don't like having sex with your husband. She will say, no, I think it's great we have sex, right?
Yeah.
That's great. It's
Yeah.
worth 40. It just costs 20 and I don't have 20. And so how do we get your life such that you have 20 so that if you want to invest that 20 in seducing your husband or engaging sexually, you can. And husbands, it teaches husbands to actually engage where the engagement actually helps rather than just berating. But yeah.
Well, I was going to say, I think that it goes back to the principle of how much have you invested in your wife in non-sexual ways? How much
That's
have you
right.
filled her tank such
Yep.
that it feels like a natural, organic response to crawl into the bed and to want to lay next to you naked? Like,
Right.
you can't just let her cook you dinner, let her do the dishes, let her tuck the kids in, and then you're waiting in the bedroom for her to come and sex you down. Like, she has no interest in that because you're just being another one of the kids. Like, you're just another responsibility that she has to take care of when you're not partnering in the process of all the domestic responsibilities and asking about her day and giving her lots of non-sexual touch. So I love this conversation. Yes. Tell me more. All right. So what other things did you learn that you were like, I got to put that in a book someday?
Well, that was the part of the initial growing up and hearing these messages and thinking, I don't think that's going to be true of me. And then getting married and going, yeah, it's not. I mean, I think sex with my wife is fantastic and awesome and wonderful. And the vast majority of the power of it is that it's her. And I really enjoy her and I enjoy being with her. And I'm like, I guess I'm that weird guy who it's not about sex for me. If you could ask me like, hey, your wife will have sex with you anytime you want, but she's not going to be into it. Would that be a good thing?
Mercy
like,
sex is
yeah,
not
like,
on the menu
no.
for most men.
No, like and it turns out, I think it's the Feldens who discovered like 97% of men don't like that. They don't. Okay, so
what turns a man on most is a fully turned on woman. And if she's just spreading her legs and going through the motions, he'd rather not.
So I don't know if you've run into this, but I predicted, because it's what Hollywood and everybody else who lies tells me or is mistaken tells me, is that women are always complaining about not enough foreplay, and men are just want a quickie, and that may be true at a certain percentage of the time, but at least the counseling I've done, more often the complaint is reversed.
I was going to say,
like, I wish we would take more time, and the wife is sometimes like, yeah, but sometimes I just want a quickie.
Just hurry up and get it over with is what she's often thinking. But again, it goes back to that. Does she feel the support of what all she has to do in her world to make everything click into place? Because let's be real, most women are the main domestic engineer, domestic goddess.
Sure.
The one that makes it all happen, meals and kids' homework and all that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Okay, so where do I want to go from here? My head is just like spinning with all kinds of
let me talk about the transactional thing, because I think sometimes that message,
yes, please,
what drives women into the dirt, and men don't know it's happening. And that is, so here's the deal. The secular perspective on marriage is that there was a caveman somewhere back in the past. There was a caveman who wanted sex whenever he wanted it. And there was a cave woman who wanted protection and provision all the time. And they looked at each other and like, hey, we could make a bargain here. This is a deal. And you can get sex. You can have sex with me. I give you as much sex as I have to give you. And you give me as much protection and provision as you have to give me. And we'll both be good. And so it creates this, what marriage essentially is a transaction. It's a series of transactions where I have a commodity you want, you have a commodity I want. And so we're just going to trade commodities. And what's wild is the majority, it seems to me, so I don't want to overstate it, but it seems to me like the majority, at least of popular Christian marriage books that engage with sexuality during the 70s, 80s, and 90s in particular, whether they meant to or not, presented marriage this way. That it is essentially, you've got needs, she's got needs, and y'all need to trade needs. And
So
that's how you keep people happy.
they portray it as an exchange rather than
Right.
a synergy.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it becomes this contract where, her job is to give, and I'll use the euphemism, put out as much as she has to keep him around. And
Mhm.
he's essentially putting out as much as he has to in order to keep her around.
Mm.
And if she will take care of his needs enough, then he won't go try to get those needs met someplace else.
Mhm.
And if he takes care of her needs enough, then she won't go looking for her needs someplace else. And this is taught. I mean, I have seen so many damaged marriages from Christian books or Christian speakers who present this model. And it's not free, it's not grace-based, it's not fun,
Right.
it's not any of those.
It reminds me of the woman who told me that her mother sat her down the night before her wedding and said, "Now, honey, he's going to want to do things to you after the wedding, and just go through with it because it's better than being homeless." Like, what kind of pep talk is that? So you've painted a really clear picture of worst
Lovely.
case scenario, two people doing the minimum to get
Right.
by. That's what I heard,
That's
is two people are doing the minimum. Paint us a picture of what it looks like when two people are showing up in all their glory and investing the maximum in one another.
Okay, here's what's fun. So imagine, so if I said to pick a couple and I go, you've got 15 minutes to clean your bedroom. And how would you spend the 15 minutes? Make a list of 3 to 5 things that you would do to create a clean bedroom in 15 minutes. And then I have their spouse do the same thing. They will not list the same things.
Right.
They will list very different things.
Right.
Like like for her, it's the bed needs to be made in order for the room to feel clean. And he's like, I need the piles of laundry removed, whatever they happen to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then the question becomes, so take that and kind of set that over here. Now, which is better, to pay someone to scratch your back, or there it goes again, or to ask
You're
someone
liking
to
yourself.
scratch your back? I know it exactly. Or to ask someone to scratch your back and they scratch your back. Well, most people would say,
Okay,
I'd
give me the
rather,
two options again.
so either I pay someone
Pay
to
somebody to
scratch
scratch your back,
or you just ask someone and they scratch your back.
okay. Is there a third option? Somebody
Well, the third
sees
one is
that you
going to
could use a
be
back
that
scratch
someone
and
just
didn't have
starts
to ask.
scratching your back, right, without you even asking,
Yeah,
right?
unrealistic expectations. Let's just label that one right there.
Well, it doesn't have to be. Yes, it can be if you just expect mind reading, yes.
Yeah.
But the idea is, all of us prefer a gift. We prefer a gift to a purchase we prefer a gift to a request and a request to a purchase.
We
We
prefer a
love when
gift to
somebody,
a request and a
uh-huh.
request to a purchase. Okay. All
So
right. I'm with you.
if I say I'd like a new truck, what I really want is someone just to show up with a new truck for me, right? Hey, I heard I saw your truck and realized you need a new truck. I just thought I'd give you a free truck. Because the gift is always the best option. And I think that's hardwired into us by God.
Sure.
That we prefer the gift, the best thing in the world. I mean, part of why I'm married to the woman.
Salvation, free gift.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so part of why I'm married to the woman I'm married to is, early on in our dating life, we were sitting in church together and I leaned forward and she started scratching on she just leaned over, reached her arm over, started scratching on my back. And I was like, this is like heaven on earth. And her claiming me in front of all these people, and she's also got these great nails scratching on my back. And
what it represents, you felt like king of the world.
That's exactly
This
right.
pretty girl scratching your back.
So here's the thing. God has created a system, and this is really a big part of the first part of the book, and people, I think, have to buy into it. The first part of the book, it's a little bit of a long book, and which may cost us in this topic. Now my son and I are like, maybe we should have made 2 books out of this, but because a lot of times people don't want to read 300 pages of marriage book. But in order to do it right, to understand this perspective, is how do I engage with what she loves? Early on in marriage, usually you've got enough resources at the end of the day, psychologically, that you didn't spend all your resources anyway. You can, if they wanted you to spend money, if she wants me to go to Target with her, I'm like, sure, I got 20 points of psychological energy to go to Target. Costs her none. It costs me 20. It's worth 40 to both of us, but we, whatever. I can do that. But later in marriage, when you got kids and responsibilities and you're the boss and you own a company and you whatever, you're like, no, I'm not going to Target. I don't have it to spend.
Right.
Well, but what if I do have something to spend? Where do I invest it? And so when I have limited resources, marriage is based on the principle that my first job is to create a great life for my spouse. Now, that, of
I
course,
like that.
obviously that can become codependent weirdness, but
Right.
outside of that, you go, my first ministry is to make a great life for my spouse. Well, what if she thinks her first job is to create a great life for me? And then all those things, the room being cleaned, when she only has 15 minutes, what she picks is what will make the room seem clean to me.
Mm-hmm.
And what I pick is what makes the room seem clean to her.
Ah.
So she comes home to a made bed, which is a gift to her that she didn't have to make.
Mm.
And that's 85% clean for her.
Right.
And I come home to now even a more luxurious, and this is what romance is. By the way, romance by definition is a discipline.
Okay.
Romance is choosing what is special to the other person, even at your own expense.
Okay.
And
I like
I
that.
don't buy flowers for my wife because I like flowers. I buy flowers for my wife because
She likes flowers.
Right. It's that simple. But people are like, oh, but some people are romantic naturally. I don't think so. But if you are, then it's probably not very romantic.
Right.
Anyway,
right.
Whole other conversation. But this is the idea that God created, I think, is it's not transactional. It is a life of giving to the other person, sometimes at your own expense. There are healthy and unhealthy ways to do that, and you have to be careful,
Sure.
but and healthy ways that you're giving to them so that they get these free gifts all the time. Now, take that principle to the bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And you take that principle to sexuality and you say, how do I create the best sexual experience for her? Well,
Right.
I'm going to have to get to know her really well. I'm going to have to know her body, every inch of it.
Mm.
I'm going to have to know how to respond to her input. I'm going to have to listen to her words. Oh, you'll like this. Another pattern very often that we've picked up on is that men often hear things critically.
Yes.
And women often mean them consultatively.
Yes.
As if you and my wife were driving down the road and you said she was following a car in front of her too closely, she would probably say, I'm sorry, and then slow down.
Exactly.
Because this whole conversation y'all just had about, I'm feeling unnecessary anxiety, and I know you care about me, and that a man wouldn't have even heard, that two women were able to have, right?
Right.
Without even having it. Two men, if I was driving down the road with a man and I said, hey, you're following that car too closely, he would take it as criticism, because that's probably how I would mean it. It's like, you need to learn a 2-second rule.
Dude. Yeah.
Right.
Back
Dude,
off.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Come on, dude. So what happens very often is the wife, early on in marriage, the wife will say some version of, you're following that car too closely. And he says, I mean, I can freaking pull over if you want to drive.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
Because he heard, you're an idiot, and it's from the one person in the world he wants to impress.
Yeah.
And now he shuts her down, and she's like, oh, he doesn't care about how I feel.
Exactly.
So you'll love it. Here's how I train men to respond to this. I call it, for men, this is lifestyle seduction. Because I said,
lifestyle seduction.
Yeah,
I
you'll
love
like
that.
This. And so I said, you take flowers to her, you bring her a dozen red roses, and she goes, I love roses, but yellow is my favorite.
No. Okay.
Now, I will tell you, my experience is about half of men know to say, okay, I'll do yellow roses next time. Mm-hmm. But half of men still go, you're gonna criticize flowers? Right? Now,
which is really sad. Or red is for romance, so I'm going to get her red, even though yellow is her favorite.
That's right. Yeah, I'm going to dictate. I'm going to decide.
Yeah.
So where I take them is the bedroom, and I say, I want you to imagine you're touching your wife in an effort to give her an orgasm. And she says, that feels good, but do it a little slower.
Yes.
And at that point, men understand consultative communication. Most men do. Right?
If it's feedback about their sexual technique, they're a little more open.
That's right. And so they
want to be a dream lover.
Right, exactly. Apparently only 2 or 3% of men, and they're diagnosable, the psychopaths and the narcissists, but they go, most men know not to go like, you're going to criticize this too? They know like, okay, slower. I'll go slower. Right?
Exactly. Thank you for the feedback.
So Shannon, here's what blew me away was the first time I asked a woman, a wife in counseling in these settings, I said, what's different between those three conversations? Hey, you're following that card too closely. I love red. I love the roses, but yellow's my favorite. And that feels good, but could you do it more slowly? And the woman said, those are the same conversation.
It's feedback. It's
That's right.
letting them know how they feel.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
And if men can learn to say all three of those are, so I actually said, wait a minute, before the husband speaks, I want to ask you a clarifying question. You're saying that in a sense, all of those are preparing you for an orgasm. And she said, you are darn straight it is. She goes, because
Yes.
I tell you, if he shuts me down about the car, the door is locked later.
If he can't make me feel safe in the front seat of a car,
Right.
why would he make me feel safe in the privacy of our bedroom?
That's
Totally.
right.
I also think that a really big thing for women is they can't go from 0 to 100 with sexual touch when he hasn't yet hugged her, he
Yeah.
hasn't offered her a massage, he hasn't, like, there has to be non-sexual touch that happens frequently,
Yeah.
frequent investments, because then it doesn't feel so weird if he touches you and his hands roam somewhere else. But
Right.
if you're going straight for the parts that are covered by a bathing suit, to put it in Christian language, and you're not taking the time to cuddle, caress, kiss, hold her
Yes.
hand, rub her back, all that, you are spinning your wheels and painting
Yes.
the picture that the cliche is true. Men only want sex.
That's right. And that's how women are going to actually, that exact example I think may be in the book is that because the first time that I had a female client when I was probably 25 or 26 years old say to me, I wish my husband would touch me more non-sexually. And I'm not kidding. I didn't know what she meant. I was like, I was like, now I faked it well. I was like, tell me more. But in my head, I was like, what is she talking about? And I did not know until then that women divided their bodies into sexual and non-sexual parts.
Yep.
Men don't think that way.
Right.
I touch my wife as sexually as the situation allows.
Yeah.
And so, and for all the women in the world who don't understand why their husband cops a
Gropes.
feel every time he
Yeah.
walks past her or gropes her when he's near her or does like all that kind of stuff, there is a husband who doesn't understand why his wife doesn't
Yeah.
do the exact same stuff because we're
Well,
like, well, you could.
and a lot of men will say, well, that's the only thing I can get away with because you shut me down once we get in the bedroom. And it's like, well,
Yeah,
yeah, maybe
yeah, maybe
some
catch a
reverse
clue here,
psychology
bro.
that you need to unwind
Yeah,
there.
exactly. So she does, well, you want me to do this, so that's what I do. Like, yeah, that's probably not getting to moving you in the path you want to go, my friend. Like that's,
Yeah.
but so that you're
Becoming a
exactly right.
becoming
So
a
women don't think that way.
student of
Yes,
not just your wife, but it goes both ways. Because let's be
yes,
real, women could do a better job too of becoming a
yes,
student of what makes him feel like the king of the world, because
that's
we
right.
hold so much power in that
Yes.
space. Like, I heard it said that if we don't cook for him, he can go to McDonald's. If we don't clean for him, he can hire a maid. But
Yes.
who can he sexually bond with
He
if
better
we
not with it,
are
right?
not available for that exchange of energy? I really do like the concept, though, of two people coming into that sexual relationship. uh Basically, you focus your sexual energy in a specific, like, laser pointed direction when you are in the act of making love. And in
Right,
that process of work, going through the arousal stage and the climax stage and the orgasm, all that, it's you're channeling and you're focusing your efforts in a really specific direction. And when you have two people who totally trust each other to focus their directions
right.
simultaneously, it's just like such this synergistic exchange.
Absolutely.
So, what was your language earlier? Transactional versus
Intimate.
intimate?
So it's in you can engage sexually in an illicit way, which is engaging in the dark, secretive, abusive, whatever side of sexuality, and it can be hot in the same way that a house fire is hot.
Yeah.
In the same way, methamphetamine apparently feels really good. I've not done it, but I've heard good things. The problem is it kills you, right? It
Right.
destroys you. So I assume a house fire is hot. You just don't have a house when it's over.
Right. And the
And
difference between a house fire and a campfire is there's a boundary around the campfire.
that's right.
Still hot, but
Right.
pleasurable hot,
So
not scary hot.
eroticism is you're engaging in sexuality because sexuality is intended to feel good and can feel good. And the idea of eroticism. The problem is eroticism, eroticism sometimes feels like it can be in competition with long-term relationships. Like, because I get it again, the eroticism of like, there's a novelty often connected to that. And every year I'm less likely to get called by Shape Magazine to be on the cover. Like I am less, my erotic playing field is not, I'm not as powerful on the erotic playing field as I was 30 years ago. So what's the other option? Well, the other option is intimate. And in intimacy, I'm not having sex, I'm having another person sexually. And
Mm.
so I'm having the key is that I'm having this other person and they're
Can you
having
use a
me.
different verb than having?
I don't know what other verb to use because that's
In
the idea is
maybe
it's like
enjoying?
enjoying is great.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think a woman wants to be enjoyed more than she
for
wants to be
sure.
had. It just kind of brings up these feelings of, like
Not
men
ownership,
taking you,
experience.
grabbing them
Yeah,
by the or whatever, it's
yeah,
yeah, the I think women are uber sensitive to the spirit with which he approaches her sexually
absolutely.
or physically. And that if he can learn what makes her safe, not what turns her
Yes,
on. You'll get to that eventually. You'll
yes,
get to what turns her on eventually, but if she doesn't feel safe, she's never going to be turned on. She may go through the motions and let you have sex with her just to
right,
pacify you, but
right.
again, most men don't want that sort of exchange.
No,
But I love the picture that you're painting.
let's
That
use the word chosen. Chosen is the word I use most often
okay,
in the book, to be chosen sexually. Because
I
I know
love
at least
that.
for men, that's very powerful language.
Well, not just to men, but also
Right.
to women, because so many women whose husbands have turned to pornography because her
Yes.
sexual energy was just out the bottom and he just felt as if he was somehow justified to take it in a different direction.
Right.
The idea that he chose to look at
Right.
another woman is deeply devastating.
Absolutely.
So to feel chosen by him, I hope that women would hear that as an encouragement, as an invitation, not a
Right.
requirement, but not being required, but being inspired to tap into that sexual
Yeah.
energy. Now, you talked about all the locks
Yes.
and how a lot of times women don't want all the foreplay. They just want him to hurry up and finish. But let's be real, that's crappy.
Right. Right.
That is transactional in my
Yes,
opinion.
it is. It
But the
absolutely is.
reason that foreplay is so important to women is because she has all those locks to
Right.
undo. It takes her a while to get to the place where she feels that animalistic desire. Can I use that
Yep.
word? That
Yeah,
Song of
sure.
Solomon desire.
Right. Right.
Um, yeah, so men need to understand that when he approaches her at first, the answer is probably going to be no, only because we don't have nearly as much testosterone coursing through our veins
That's true too.
as men
Right.
do. Men are always going to be more ready and eager than a woman, but that's not where the story has to end. Like to simply ask, if I were to help you relax and unwind, if I were
Right.
to pour a glass of wine, uh, can we just see where it goes?
Right.
That just sounds a lot better than withdrawing and pouting. Talk to me
Yes. Oh,
about,
yes.
because that's so sexy to a woman.
Yes,
So
exactly.
sexy when he puts on his flannels and it's just like, fine.
Yeah, exactly.
One woman told me that her husband would put her blanket and her pillow in the floor once he went to bed if she had denied him sexually or not,
Right.
exchanged that foreplay energy. That was his way of punishing her, to say, well, this
That's a
is
good one.
his comment was, well, this is a marriage bed, and if you're not going to engage in the marriage bed, then why would you sleep? Like, oh, that's really gaining you points, pal.
Yeah, exactly. That's super romantic. I bet she was way into it later.
Can't wait to mount that, is what she was thinking. We know.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So yeah, talk to me about a better strategy that men can employ if they're not getting the eager
Okay.
responsiveness that they would love to have. I mean, let's be real, they would love it if she pursued him, but it's
Sure.
not going to happen that way every time. It's a tennis match. It's not a racquetball game. So,
Well, once I unpacked this understanding, the first thing I had to do, by the way, was go to my wife and apologize for all the times that I thought we were speaking the same language. That
hmm,
like that I thought she
humility.
understood my perspective and I understood hers. And when I realized that so often she was dividing out her identity from her sexuality, and it made it seem like I was choosing her sexuality at the expense of her. And because I didn't even think that way, I didn't even understand that way of thinking. And
Right.
so I'll give you a great example. So the good news is that what I would say, in my opinion, some of the really best news is I actually think men intuitively get this well. We just don't know we have to communicate it or how to. And so, because I think a woman wants to feel wholly chosen, and that's how men typically choose their women, is wholly, like WHOLLY, like the whole thing, because that's how we see it, is not divided out. But the problem is the way we communicate it is so easy to interpret as being divided out. So case in point, after I'd learned all this, took one of the kids away for a 5-day canoe trip to whatever. I get back, I'm being flirty with my wife, and she teasingly says, "Oh, I figured you'd be wanting some later since I'd been gone for, 5 days."
Mhm.
And I stopped and I was like, wait, no. I'm adult man. I could get some anytime I want. I waited all week for you.
For you. Oh, score!
Yeah,
I
right?
bet she felt a little bit of a lady boner tingle.
Here's what's wild is that
It's
is I
great
thought she knew
language.
that. I thought she always knew that. So this is the kind of pop quiz I talk about a couple who's fighting all day and they're on each other's nerves all day and they just can't get in sync all day.
Mhm.
And at the end of that day, he says, "So do you want to mess around?" And she interprets that as, well, here we are once again. He doesn't even like me. He
Mm.
doesn't enjoy my company. He can't even get along with me, but boy, will he be happily go jump in the bed and have sex again. Okay.
Right. Right.
So when I teach this, here's how I say it. I then stop and I'm like, okay, I want everybody to hear this. I said, I want you to imagine, ladies, that he comes in after a day like that. So same day, on edge, no one's getting along. You just can't get in sync. Just one of those days you're not yelling and screaming, just kind of sniping. You just can't get it together. I said, instead of saying, "Hey, do you want to mess around?" He comes in and sits down in front of you, takes your hands and looks you in the eye and says, "I want you to know something. I know it's been a hard day and
Mm.
I know we've not been able to get along. And I know it's been tough and I get it. I want you to know that even at the end of a day like today, I choose you. I don't want anyone but you. You're who
She's a
I."
puddle.
So what's wild, I know you know this, but I tell you that, and women have tears in their eyes
Yes.
all over the room.
Yes.
And then I go, this is the
Because they're
thing.
used to the pouty response. To have a grown man show up and have an honest, vulnerable, sincere conversation that says, "Hey, you in your flannels,
Yeah,
I think you're cute. And I'm not just telling you that because I want to have sex.
right.
I'm telling you that because I choose you." Like, that would just be so refreshing.
So here's what's wild. That's what he thought he said.
Oh,
When
yeah.
he said, "Do you want to mess around?" He
He thought
thought
he was
she
saying, "I
knew to
choose you."
interpret that as, "Hey, even though it's been a terrible day and we've been on edge all day and we've not been getting along, I want you to know I still choose you." But
Mm.
see how they just soared past each other like rockets in opposite direction. He's now hurt like like an 8-year-old who gave his mother Legos for Mother's Day, and she threw them at him and said, "You like Legos, you idiot, not me." That's how he feels, is
Oh.
just crushed. And she feels like, I know all he cares about is sex. He doesn't love me. He just wants what I can produce for him. And yet they didn't have to misunderstand each other. And so the idea being, can he learn to predict, okay, how is she going to hear this? And
Mm.
can I communicate exactly what I want to communicate?
Yeah.
That's what he wanted to communicate to her was, I choose you in the best way I know how.
Mm-hmm.
But what he said sounded to her like, I really like sex and you're handy.
Mm.
Um, it's the old Billy Crystal lie, which was women need a reason to have sex and men just need a location.
Place. Yeah.
And that's just a lie. There's no research to back that. And yet book after book after book has presented that as an error, both from the male and female perspective, that
Yeah.
women don't really want sex, but they will give it up in order to get what they need out of marriage. And all men care about is sex, but they'll give some love if that can get them
Mm.
sex. And there's no research to back that. And in fact,
Well,
everything defies it.
and this idea that women only have emotional needs but don't have sexual needs, and
It's
men
ridiculous.
only have sexual needs and don't have emotional needs,
Nope.
totally off base.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Totally an error.
I think that a lot of times women assume that men's hearts and penises are totally disconnected from one another, and that if she
Wow.
just services what's below the belt, then his heart should be fine. That is
No.
that is not the case, especially in the
Yep.
case of mercy sex, like we've been talking about.
Yeah. Take
I
one
feel
for the
like
team.
we could go on and on with this conversation, Chris Legg.
Easily. Yes, for
But
sure.
but for the man who wrote a 384-page book, I guess I need to have a boundary line there and say, well, it's time to wrap up. But what last piece of advice do you have for couples who really want to get this right or really
Yeah.
want to experience maybe what they've never experienced before, or maybe they experienced it early on and they've lost that love and feeling and don't know how to find it? What's your best advice?
I would say, Shannon, and to comment on, by the way, we mentioned my son, so let me comment just there. You know, he was writing all this with me before he was married. And so he's a gifted writer. And so I've got all these concepts and he helped me organize them into this book and added his own thoughts and stuff. But he is so good at that. But it was a gift from God that I was getting to have during the year my son was getting engaged and getting married. He and I were meeting for an hour every week to talk about sex and marriage. And so one is, please invest the truth in your children.
Mm.
Please invest the truth about sexuality in your kids. There's great resources out there, and there's also some real trash. Anything that anytime, I'm telling you, especially for women who have a real instinct for this, if you're reading a marriage book, especially a Christian one, no, anyone, and it starts to feel transactional, like they're telling you you've got a commodity that you need to purchase something from your
It-
husband with it.
you owe
Get rid
this
of
to him every 72 hours because that's
Right.
what you signed up for. Yeah.
Yeah, dump it. Trash
Yeah.
it at that point. There may be great things in the book, and you can learn what you can learn from the book, but that message is not right. It's
Yeah.
not
Or at
biblically
least,
sound or psychologically sound.
or at the very least, learn to chew up the meat and spit out the bones.
Exactly. Right.
Absorb what's beneficial to you, but recognize when it's crossing a line and making you feel objectified. I think that
Right.
whole transactional conversation makes women feel like an objectified commodity
Yep.
that is valued or not.
Right.
So yeah, I love that I choose you because I
Yep.
value you, because I cherish you, because I love
Right.
you. And of course, being aroused by you is part of that whole equation. It's yeah.
So I would say my one piece of advice I think that has been really healthy for our marriage too is when you read these books, when you read any marriage books, listening to podcasts like yours, or reading your books or this one. So I think one of the cool things, so my wife read The Sexually Confident Wife, but we read it out loud together. Like we read it and discussed it.
Mhm.
And I think there's something very powerful to that practice, to reading a marriage book, especially when it talks about sexuality out loud, because one, not everyone in any generality all fails. I mean, like 20% of wives say they wish their husband would have sex with them more often. And 70% of men say they wish their wives would have sex more often. And 10% are on the same page, apparently, which is crazy, but only 10%. but again, it's an opportunity to live and grow and sacrifice and understand. And so I would say that's a great conversation starters is to listen to each other, and how to interpret, because we don't intuitively interpret things the same way. And so you get a husband or a wife trying to do something super sweet, super precious, wonderful thing, but it gets perceived as criticism or perceived as denial or perceived as rejection.
Mm.
And it just feels hopeless when you face those times. And you're like, even my best efforts, she sees them as bad, or even my best efforts, he perceives them as critical. And it's like,
That you have some sort of selfish ulterior motive to
that's
everything
right.
that you do. Yeah.
Right.
And that's really disrespectful toward men and the sexual desire that God placed not just in men, but also
Right.
in women. So I'm going to recommend, I'm going to make a recommendation to everyone. When we were talking about conversing with your children about
Yes.
sexuality, probably most people cringe at that idea because their parents never talked to them. So it's not a
Right.
vocabulary that they've ever had. I would really encourage you to get Chris and Mark Legg's book and read it, and let that be a gift that you give to your child. And don't wait until their wedding day. I would say,
Yes, please.
when they reach adulthood, when they reach college age, I think that one of the best ways to get your child not to go crazy sexually in college is to cast a vision of what they're
Yes.
aiming for, of
Oh my
something
gosh,
real
yes.
and genuine and holy and sacred. And so I think that this book would be a phenomenal resource. And I'm really proud of you for putting it all together, all 384 pages, which tells me that you get your money's worth with this book.
Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Well,
Well,
thank you so much.
we thank you, Chris. Thank you for sharing your insights. And I love the way that your mind works about all these things. I haven't felt this much energy about a conversation in a long, long time. So
Well, we'll have to do a follow-up sometime down the road. That'd be
that would
great.
be fun. Yeah. So this has been another episode of Sexual Confidence on Tap with Shannon Ethridge and friends. We love you for listening.
And thank you for tapping on us.